Ethical Perspectives on the News is produced by the Interreligious Council of Linn County, which is solely responsible for its content. The views and opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily reflect those of the staff and management of KCRG TV9.
Good morning, and welcome to Ethical Perspectives on the News. I'm your moderator, Karl Cassell. During the last academic school year, educators, students, and parents alike have had to grapple with the effects of COVID-19 and how to make sure to keep our students motivated, our teachers engaged and effective. There has obviously been a hybrid method of learning during the past year with in-person and online learning. Today, we're going to discuss the effects and hopefully the benefits of these methods. Joining us today, we have Noreen Bush, Superintendent of Cedar Community School District. Good morning. Next, we have Dr. John Achrazoglou, Chief Technical Officer and from U of I's College of Education. Good morning.
Good morning, Karl.
And lastly, Ernie, Principal of Cedar Rapids Schools District Virtual Academy. Good morning.
Good morning, Karl.
And so let's start out with a simple question, but probably one that has really been front of mind for parents, students, and I'm assuming educators alike. What has been the biggest takeaway for students and educators this year in adjustment of teaching and learning?
So I'll be glad to kick that off, Karl. So thank you again for inviting the conversation. You know, I was in a conversation with an elementary teacher mid-year this year who was actually, she had to teach remote and she'd done some in person. And as a result of that conversation, we started calling opportunities that we've learned from this year COVID ops. And so we've had a lot of opportunity to rethink what we're doing. And so I think what we found that prioritizing access for every single child was our number one goal as a district. So every child got a device, and also ensuring every child and family would have access to the internet. So whether they be at home or at school, they would be able to have opportunities to learn. This cannot happen without a lot of choreography. And I think we learned that we could do some heavy lifts, amazing heavy lifts that we thought would take years. We did in a matter of months, sometimes even weeks. But that was because of a common vision of what we believe for children. So our teachers, number one thing to affect a child's learning is the instructor in front of them and the support staff that make learning happen. So our teachers had to go through a ton of professional development to make things happen for kids from either platform. So I would just say people have made the difference this year, and we definitely learned a lot of pluses, and then a lot of things that we would maybe learn to do better as we move forward.
I agree. Again, it took a lot of heavy lifting, and we've learned a lot. We sure have come a long way. When we first had to abandon ship more or less on face-to-face and go online, I remember just a myriad of technical difficulties, just doing the simplest thing, microphones, video, speakers, connectivity, and it was challenging. But just last week, I had a totally online class with over 50 students, and not one single glitch. Not one moment was spent on technical troubleshooting. It was all purely instructional. So we've come a long ways, be it the technologies and the technical sophistication of our teachers and support personnel, and of course our students.
I think I would echo everything that's been said. And I think the thing that got us through this from a community standpoint was I principal at Madison Elementary, go Mustangs. I'm there as well. And I can say that all of the work we did, every member of our community felt like they had options that were good for their family during this past year. And, you know, obviously some of the things they were thinking about were public health related. But at any time we had options that everyone in our community felt like were serving their families. the way that they needed it to be offered. And I think that showed us and taught us that we have more choice that we can provide going into the next school year. And Cedar Rapids Virtual Academy is one example of that.
And one thing I want to add too, and again, certain audiences, I saw a couple of good examples of students who might not have had a school experience unless it was online, particularly students with disabilities who might be homebound or hospital bound now had a chance with everybody going online to have a part in the school experience. Well, there's a lot of things happening there, being with your peers rather than taking things by correspondence, again, off the school grounds. So instead of kids coming to school, the school sort of came to them. And there's a lot of neat stories that are there that increase accessibility, not just in being face-to-face with video, but accessibility of more materials, having things on digital text online. You can copy, paste, you can highlight, can be spoken out loud, things like that, and caption videos. All of that put together, I think, can enhance and enrich the school experience for a variety of audiences.
Very good. So not a lot of data and time to really answer this question. So anecdotally, or just kind of how you feel, is the online process as good as the in-person from your own perspective? And what would be some of the benefits and the drawbacks? You've talked about them. So speak a little bit to that if you don't mind.
So I like to think about it in a continuum. So you have completely in-person instruction, and then all the way over on the other side, completely online or remote instruction. And so I think what we have gone from is this or environment. Either you're going to be completely in person or you're going to be completely online. And that's certainly what we had to offer this year due to lots of complications due to the pandemic and certainly health circumstances. But what I imagine and what I'm excited about is the variance that now can be provided along the way. So in an in-person classroom, how might we enhance personalized learning or differentiated instruction with blended practices? And how might in the remote world we invite more flexible opportunities for in-person opportunities? When I look at a high school schedule, I think we definitely have obviously the most independent learners at the high school level. And what we're finding is that kids are, because of this experience, finding that, you know what, that particular content, I really like doing that in the online world. But this particular content, I prefer to do in person with a class discussion with other people. And so to be able to provide that continuum of option, we're able to really cater to what kids' strengths are and what they need. So I don't know if it's one is better than the other. It's really what's best for the child's learning. I heard some really cool stories this year about kids who struggled actually in the in-person environment in prior years, and the remote environment suited them really well, and they had their best year of growth. Some of them, even a couple of students that I had stories about within this who qualify for special education services, had so much growth that they no longer needed special services for some particular goals. So it's varied, and I think it depends on the child and what they need. So the more that we know what each child needs and the more options we have, the better we'll be able to serve all of them.
Yeah, and this is a thread that John mentioned earlier too. We, as part of being able to operate over this past year, we acquired some adaptive online learning platforms for students to use, both if they were in remote environments or even in person in a blended learning environment. And it was really exciting to see students that had never had an opportunity to engage with content through a game-based simulation, for example, or just a game-based design that is how they engage in math learning. And seeing students who historically may have thought of themselves as not being a math learner in a traditional sense, begin to rethink their identity around that content area and really experience some success. So I think we're seeing new things being broadly available. And to Noreen's point, this was in the works. It just, we accelerated it to meet the public health crisis that we were living through.
And I'd like to add, the online, I heard from students who probably never would have said anything in a face-to-face class because of the dynamics and the differences between the two. But Karl, I've been asked that question a lot. Is online as good as face-to-face? And it depends. I think in the hands of a skilled teacher with properly trained, it can be as effective, be very effective. Because, all of us have probably seen or heard of bad face-to-face instruction. And of course, we've all seen or heard about bad online instruction. So I think the proper technologies behaving and a skillful teacher in control, I think can be very, very effective.
And there certainly were some circumstances in which it was overwhelming for a child and a family. And we offered opportunity for folks to come back to in-person instruction, even if they chose remote instruction. And we had families say, you know what, it's not matching my child's needs, and therefore they came back to in-person instruction. And so, especially maybe at the most early developmental ages, kindergarten, first and second grade, where socialization and playing and responding to other students and other children is all a part of learning. And so, not to say that can't also be part of online learning and remote instruction, but I do think that there were certainly balances of it worked great for some and too much maybe for others.
So each of you have talked about the teachers. So my questions have been specifically directed at students. So talk about how the teachers are adapting and what is their perspective from what you guys have heard, and are they enjoying the mixture of both learning platforms?
Ernie, you should talk about your learning today with your team. It was really cool.
Yeah, sure. So we had 2 days this week to meet with all of the teachers that will be teaching for Cedar Rapids Virtual Academy next year. And these are teachers who had experienced teaching remotely throughout this past school year. And when this opportunity came up, they jumped at it because they felt like their practice, and we're talking about teachers that have been in the profession for a few years and teachers who have been teaching they're in their 20 or 20 plus years of teaching. And they felt like this had really invigorated their practice, had helped them think about new ways of creating lessons, assessments, and just new ways of interacting with students. So we have a great team that has come to this work, and we're trying to learn from what worked last year and change things that we know weren't ideal that we do have control over next year. And we know this can work. At the end of the year, I went into classrooms to visit my teachers who were ending the year with their remote students. So one of them had sat in a classroom at my building teaching students at home all year. And there were all the things that you see in person. There were tears. There were kids that didn't want to hang up the Zoom call because they had bonded with their teacher and with their peers. So when I saw teachers could make that kind of connection with students in a remote world, I knew this was going to work for some of our teachers as well as it has for some of our students.
And I'm also asked, how do you build that relationship, that student-teacher relationship? If you have 30 students on Zoom, how do you do that? Well, how do you do it in a regular classroom? Take some creativity and some, I hate to say it, some strength to be able to communicate, be able to make things exciting and meaningful to all those kids. But I think it's a lot of the same issues, building that trusting teacher-student relationship so you have a productive teaching learning opportunity, whether it be face-to-face or online. I think it can be done both ways.
I observed an online classroom this year at one point in time, and there were, students are on the screen, the teachers on the screen, and I'm observing this on the screen. And there's a couple of kids, one with a kitten in her hand, another one, little brother sitting right beside her, and parents sitting right next to their kids or jumping in to help. And so what I witnessed in the remote instruction world is this inviting each other into our personal homes, even teachers, their personal homes, our paras, their personal homes, and our families. And, you know, when you sit down and break bread with someone and they're in your home, I mean, it just creates a very unique connection. And so it was really some very unique relationships established. And I would say what we also learned for everyone, all of our teachers and all of our families, we provided opportunity for virtual conferences this year. Very similar experience to talk with, you know, with each other like this from each other's homes about what's happening at school. So certainly a lot of engagement happening.
It was interesting. I observed a junior high class, and you had about 20 students tiled up. And the first thing they all did is rearrange the tiles so they were sitting next to their best friend or putting that person far away. Something you can't do in a typical classroom.
One other thought with the teachers, and this might be controversial or maybe something that is not willing to be talked about yet, but will the online platform, if this becomes our normal, could this cause a loss of jobs for teachers? Because now you can have less teachers teaching more students through an online process. Is there concern that we won't need the number of teachers in the future if the online process becomes more so our norm?
So I feel like John and Noreen are going to have a lot more to share on this, but I'll tell you what I know for sure is the 200 or so kids in kindergarten through 8th grade that have registered for CRVA next year. I know they wouldn't have if we did not have highly trained, passionate teachers offering that remote learning. So, you know, if someone's pondering how can I make this work without retaining and hiring and supporting qualified and passionate teachers, I would question if communities are going to come to that. I think that's the difference maker for Cedar Rapids.
I think there might even be more demand for skilled teachers. It sort of reminds me years and years ago of research when overhead projectors came out. Chalkboard versus overheads. Well, you're going to have less teachers because they can prepare and present a lot more with an overhead projector than I had to write everything down synchronously on a chalkboard. And it sort of seems silly nowadays, but I think maybe the same is playing out now. We're going to look back at this and say, you know, we need more teachers. We just carried on and it just improved the art of teaching is what's actually going on.
Yet nothing replaces the power of the human relationship. And we can do a lot of enhanced instruction or even artificial intelligence that can respond and assess students, but nothing can replace the human relationship. And when I think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we are always going to need great educators in front of kids. And I would say that we as a system had to, I mean, it was all hands on deck. And so folks who maybe had different roles that weren't necessarily in front of students every day, now we're in front of students every day because we actually needed more teachers to do the work that we did this past year.
So you bring up the artificial intelligence, but I want to talk about a little bit about virtual reality. Could the next evolution of learning be virtual reality? And if so, how will that change education for students and teachers?
Again, virtual reality, like a lot of technologies, technology is a Greek word, technique, new ways of doing things. And it'll just be a new way of teaching by immersing the student in laboratories, in field trips or whatever, in situations that can't be done face-to-face. But with these technologies, again, you can immerse them into opportunities that they have to solve problems, seek data in the virtual reality system that has been set up to simulate what they will have to be encountering later on in life. You know, I have a friend who works for John Deere, and he manages, supervises people in 4 different continents. And it's a challenge. And they are turning to virtual reality, trying to create opportunities for these people not to just learn, but to predict, to market, to do some sound business decisions. And he says, I'm looking for new hires who can do that, work within these parameters and think out of the box, whether it be with virtual reality or communicating like we are now, and be able to adjust and be able to become part of the critical need for these kinds of employees of the future generation.
We have developed what we call a profile of a graduate in Cedar Rapids, which is about, you know, the big competencies for work readiness as well. So communication, creative thinking, critical thinking, and citizenship, and collaborating with one another. So everything that was just mentioned is also our priority of the end outcome. So the virtual reality can present another means to the way to get those same competencies. So I do see sometimes it might enhance what we're doing. So for example, biology lab simulations, and or even taking a virtual tour of what a DNA chain looks like. There's many different ways in which we can use it to enhance or give kids more of a hands-on experience in a virtual way. So again, only seeking it as a supplement or a support to instruction, and finding maybe better paths to instruction, but it still comes down to that creative art and science of teaching, and that we're giving our instructors the best support and professional development to be able to use these kinds of tools.
A virtual reality system when we weren't able to go in the schools for our student teachers. And, you know, for a semester or two, you know, it worked, but not as good as actually being there in many cases. But as just said, it gave our students opportunity, more time to be a teacher in front of, although it's simulated, very realistic classroom. So more opportunity, again, to practice the craft, the art of teaching is what this virtual reality can also offer our teachers in training.
One other question, because you guys have brought up the social interaction and the relationship. This generation is probably the first generation of students that have been digitally immersed from the moment they came out of the womb, per se. Will the loss of social interaction for our youth become a larger barrier in social development if online learning becomes, again, more of the norm? And how do we combat that in an educational environment?
Well, you know, the prediction was that this online learning and the internet and that will alienate kids. I think the exact opposite has happened. They're engaging with many different other kids and also deepening their relationships. We had a project we just finished up connecting Donaldson, Iowa, Central East School District, population 900, with kids in Karachi, Pakistan, population running around 19 million, okay? And they talked about each other's communities and schools. This teacher in Donaldson, Central East School District, wanted to globalize his social studies curriculum. And boy, he did. And the students in Karachi, teachers there, wanted to have their kids practice English and learn about American customs. And how else can you do that? We would do Zoom meetings with the 2 classes once every 2 weeks. And the neat thing about the kids in Donaldson, because of time zone differences, had to get there before the school buses even took off. You're talking about very, very early. And the kids in Karachi stayed late because they valued it. And again, socialization, I think in many ways it can lead to better understandings. I believe through this, and relationships are still going on between these kids on their own, that the more we hear each other's stories, the more we see that we're alike than different. So I think it can help bridge some, not misunderstandings, but bridge better understanding of yourself and others, not around in the next building or in the next room, but around the world. And how else could you do that without these awesome online technologies?
Yeah, I mean, screen time does, it's something I think about a lot. And I think the thing I would say is not all screen time is equal. So there's an experience like John just described, and then there are situations when we have students that are engaging in social media for a large number of hours in a single day. They might be doing that at times of the day where we know that screen time near the bedtime can affect how quality of sleep, the duration of sleep. So in my mind, it's teaching kids and families and thinking as educators about what kind of experiences are we offering through our screens, and how are we intentionally designing time away from the screen to have other kinds of learning experiences and interactions.
Yeah, the natural environment is absolutely really important to the human body. And so making sure that we're encouraging, kids to be outside and kids to, play with one another outside and to be together outside, as well as how you function in person with one another. And there's different protocols. For example, our protocol here tonight, I'm muting myself when others are speaking. And then in person, I mute myself as well, just not in a technical way. And so our kids are having these opportunities to learn multiple pathways of communication, but without intentionally teaching them some of those protocols, then assumed behaviors start happening. And I think that's probably many times what we hear concerns from parents or from community members, and I'm a parent too, of making sure there's a structure in place of here, this is an intentional conversation, very much like a classroom conversation like we just described. Yet when there's not this conversation, it's really important to also know how to have personal interaction with somebody not on the screen. So to me, it's an and, not an or, and a better balance.
Thank you. And one final question. We only have a couple minutes left. Is there an opportunity for some of our high school students to take more college courses if they can be presented online? And what is the benefit of that?
I'm like the big head nodder here. Yes. Yes. So it's about access. And so here's there's no transportation barrier. There is no, lesser of a scheduling barrier. And we haven't talked about this, but just a differentiation of what we would call a synchronous online learning experience and what we call an asynchronous online learning experience, which means classes at a certain time in a synchronous experience, we're all signed in here together, we're all having this conversation at the same time, versus any place, anytime, anywhere learning, and then maybe you have a check-in with that instructor on your own schedule and on your own pace. So with flexibility, we can give kids more access so that their school four walls don't create barriers because it's not offered in my school. A car, I don't have a way to get to the college, that's no longer a barrier. So absolutely, and just a reminder to parents out there, when they take dual credit in high school, school district pays for it, and kids are leaving with those credits in their pocket.
Wonderful. Hate to cut it off. We are out of time. I want to thank Noreen, John, Ernie for this engaged opportunity to learn about our online learning versus our in-person. Well, we don't know what the future holds in terms of education of our youth, but we do know that our youth are the future, and educating them so they are capable of navigating their lives appropriately is a very important step. So let's create viable means for them to do so. Thank you and have a great day.